Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, December 7th, 1941. 1,177 sailors perished when the USS Arizona sank in 9 minutes. Yet for 16 days, salvage divers swore they heard desperate knocking from impossible depths where no man could still be alive. I am the War Maestro, and tonight I bring you a tale of men who returned to the deep and the ancient horror that answered back instead. December 7th, 1941 marked the violent entry of the United States into World War II. The Imperial Japanese Navy deployed 6 aircraft carriers, launching 353 aircraft in 2 waves against the unsuspecting American Pacific Fleet. The devastating surprise attack crippled the U.S. naval forces, sinking or severely damaging 21 ships and killing 2,403 Americans. But beneath this documented history lay a darker truth about what happened to those trapped in the USS Arizona, a truth the Navy archives would later classify as acoustically anomalous phenomena. The morning sun cast golden ripples across Pearl Harbor as Chief Boatswain's mate Alan Royce finished his coffee on the deck of the USS Arizona. At 07:55 hours, the tranquility shattered as the first Japanese bombers appeared, their rising sun insignias stark against the blue Hawaiian sky. Strange how Royce had awakened that morning from a dream of drowning, of being trapped in a metal coffin, with water slowly rising past his ears, while something ancient whispered from below. Royce had just begun directing a small maintenance detail when the first bomb struck nearby. The men looked up in collective confusion. This wasn't scheduled training. The thunderous explosion that followed threw Royce violently against a bulkhead. His ears rang as men shouted orders that dissolved into the chaos. 800 pounds of explosives tore through the Arizona's forward magazines. The massive battleship lurched as if struck by the fist of an angry god. "All hands, General Quarters," the announcement crackled through speakers. Royce felt the deck plate beneath his feet grow unbearably hot. The forward section had become an inferno in seconds. He struggled to reach his assigned emergency station, but a secondary explosion lifted him off his feet. The blast hurled him over the railing and into the harbor waters. The shock of cold after searing heat momentarily paralyzed him. When he surfaced, gasping, the world had transformed. The proud Arizona was already settling, its superstructure engulfed in flames that boiled the water around it. Swimming through oil-slicked water, Royce reached a small rescue craft. As other survivors were pulled aboard, he watched his ship, his home, sink in less than 9 minutes. Something collapsed inside him as the Arizona's stern slipped beneath the water. It wasn't just the ship that was drowning, he felt, but something fundamental about the world itself. Hours later, dazed and bandaged, Royce sat among shell-shocked survivors. The harbor continued to burn as rescue efforts transitioned to recovery. At the temporary medical station, he overheard 2 officers discussing the Arizona's blueprints, specifically the sealed compartments in the lower decks, designed to withstand flooding. Compartment 23B had been reinforced during the ship's last refit. Something about that number made Royce's skin crawl. That night, as Royce finally collapsed onto a cot in an emergency shelter, he jerked awake at 23:17 hours. A sound had pulled him from the edge of exhausted sleep. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, deliberate, like metal on metal. The pattern was unmistakable, an old Navy distress code. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 slow taps, pause, 3 quick taps again, over and over. But there was something wrong about the rhythm, something almost inhuman. "You hear that?" he asked a nearby sailor, his voice tight with urgency. The man stared vacantly, ears still ringing from explosions. No one else seemed to notice. Royce returned to the harbor's edge at dawn. The once proud Arizona now lay with only its superstructure visible above the oil-slicked water, a tomb for hundreds. As rescue divers prepared to search for survivors in accessible compartments, he approached their commander. "There's men alive in compartment 23B, Royce said with absolute conviction. "I heard them tapping." The commander's expression shifted subtly. "How do you know the compartment number?" Royce opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't consciously known it until the words left his lips. The commander placed a hand on Royce's shoulder. "The lower compartments are completely flooded, Chief. No air pockets, no survivors possible." But as the commander turned away, Royce noticed him make a small note in his logbook. Later, he would learn this was the first official documentation of what would eventually be classified as anomalous acoustic phenomena. The tapping returned that night, louder, more insistent, and somehow closer. By December 11th, memorial services had begun for the Arizona's dead. Royce stood rigid in his dress uniform as the chaplain spoke of sacrifice and eternal rest. The words rang hollow. There could be no rest for men still desperately signaling from below. Naval Intelligence had established a temporary headquarters in the administrative building overlooking the harbor. Lieutenant Commander James Thurston, thin-faced and sharp-eyed, interviewed survivors systematically. When Royce's turn came, the officer's questions focused primarily on Japanese aircraft formations and timing, until Royce mentioned the tapping. "You've reported this acoustic anomaly to your superior officers." Thurston's pen paused above his notepad, suddenly more attentive. "Yes, sir. 3 times now." Royce leaned forward. "They think it's psychological. Survivor's guilt." Thurston carefully closed his notebook. "There's a very specific protocol for handling survivor reports after catastrophic vessel loss, Chief. The mind plays tricks after trauma." "With all due respect, sir, I know what I heard. It's maritime distress code, but wrong somehow, like someone learned it secondhand." Thurston's expression remained neutral, but he reached for a separate folder marked with a red stripe. "We've had similar reports after other major sinkings, Britannic in 16, Lusitania before that." "Those men heard tapping too?" "Not just tapping." Thurston hesitated. "Chief Royce, there's something you should understand about deep water and pressure. The human ear can play tricks." That night, Royce couldn't sleep. The tapping had evolved into a complex rhythm. No longer just distress signals, but something like a conversation. He began documenting each sequence in a small notebook, marking the time and duration precisely. A pattern emerged. The sounds always began at 23:17 hours, the exact moment the Arizona's forward magazine had exploded. Against regulations, Royce borrowed a hydrophone from the salvage equipment storage. He submerged it near the Arizona's resting place and connected the headphones. The tapping came through with crystalline clarity, until something else joined it. A low, groaning sound that wasn't mechanical in nature. Royce ripped off the headphones, his heart hammering against his ribs. 2 days later, Commander Thurston summoned him. "Your night shift supervisor says you've been spending your off hours at the wreck site." Thurston's voice was carefully neutral. "I'm documenting the sounds, sir." Royce placed his notebook on the desk. "It's not random. Look at the intervals." Thurston opened the notebook, eyes scanning Royce's meticulous recordings. His expression changed subtly. "You've created quite a thorough record." "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Thurston nodded. Something answered the tapping. It wasn't human. Royce's voice remained steady despite the cold sweat forming on his back. "The men who were trapped, I think they woke something up, something that was already down there." Thurston closed the notebook with a snap. Chief Royce, effective immediately. You're being reassigned to temporary shore duty in light of recent trauma. Naval Medical will conduct a full psychological assessment. As Royce turned to leave, Thurston added quietly, "And Chief, stay away from the wreck. That's an order." That evening, Royce found his quarters had been relocated to the opposite side of the base, far from the harbor view. His notebook was missing from his footlocker. The naval psychologist was a man of clinical precision, his questions designed to excavate trauma like surgical tools. After 3 sessions, Royce had been diagnosed with acute stress reaction and recommended for extended shore leave. They'd prescribed pills that dulled his senses and smothered his dreams. He flushed them down the toilet. January 2nd, 1942, 26 days since the attack. The official recovery operation had transitioned to salvage. The bodies that could be retrieved had been. The rest were declared unrecoverable, entombed with their ship. Yet the banging continued, nightly, rhythmic, expanding. Royce found himself drawn to a small enlisted men's bar just outside the base perimeter. The Anchor's Rest had become unofficial territory for the salvage crews, men who spent their days cutting through twisted metal and retrieving waterlogged remains. He nursed a whiskey, listening to their hushed conversations. "Hey, you're that chief from the Arizona, right?" A diver slid onto the neighboring bar stool. Petty Officer First Class Daniel Whelan had the bloodshot eyes and trembling hands of a man who hadn't slept in days. "Heard you've been asking about the sounds." Royce straightened. "You've heard them too?" Whelan glanced over his shoulder before leaning closer. His breath was sour with fear and alcohol. "Third dive, we were working near frame 67. That's when it started. The tapping. At first, yeah, we thought, Christ, we thought it was survivors." Whelan's glass rattled against the bar top as he set it down. "Captain said it was impossible. The compartments were completely flooded, but we heard it, clear as day." "Did you report it?" "Of course we did. Command sent some spook types with recording equipment. But that wasn't the worst part." Whelan's voice dropped to a whisper. "On my last dive, I was near the aft magazine when the tapping started right next to my helmet. Not from inside the ship, you understand? From behind me in open water. I turned and..." He swallowed hard. There was nothing there, nothing visible, but I felt pressure, like someone standing too close in a dark room. Royce felt his skin tighten. "Did you tell your supervisor?" "Tried to. Next day I was scheduled for psychological evaluation. They're processing my medical discharge now." Whelan drained his glass. "But I know what I felt, and I know what Maddox found." "Who's Maddox?" "Master diver. Went down to compartment 23B even though it was off limits. Took photographs." Whelan's voice cracked. "They say he had a nitrogen narcosis episode. That's why he put his sidearm in his mouth that night." A heavy hand fell on Royce's shoulder. Commander Thurston stood behind them, his expression unreadable in the bar's dim light. "Evening, gentlemen. Mind if I join you?" Without waiting for an answer, he pulled up a chair. "Petty Officer Whelan, I believe your transport to the mainland leaves in the morning. Best get some rest." Whelan paled, nodding shakily before retreating into the crowd. Thurston's eyes settled on Royce. "Interesting choice of company, Chief." "Just sharing war stories, sir." "Maddox's death was unfortunate. Pressure does strange things to a man's mind." Thurston signaled the bartender. "The Arizona salvage operation has been classified under national security protocols. Loose talk undermines the war effort." "What about the recorder equipment Whelan mentioned? Did it pick up anything?" Thurston's glass stopped halfway to his lips. You know, the Japanese have an ancient belief about those who perish at sea. They say the drowning never truly die. They become haunting spirits. Primitive superstition, of course. But his eyes told a different story. Fate provided unlikely allies. Royce's new quarters placed him alongside Radio Man Second Class Francis Harlow, a lanky, bespectacled technician with access to naval communications equipment. 2 nights after the encounter with Whelan, Royce approached him with a carefully worded proposition. You operate the Navy's underwater detection systems, Royce said, leaning against the doorframe of their shared bathroom. Ever pick up anything unusual around the Arizona? Harlow's movements grew precise, deliberate. Shouldn't be discussing classified signals intelligence, Chief. I'm not asking for intelligence, just confirmation. The radio man studied Royce's face before nodding minutely. Not here. Midnight. Under a thin sliver of moon, they met at the communications facility's back entrance. Harlow led Royce through darkened corridors to a small monitoring station. Banks of equipment hummed quietly. I'm on night shift monitoring Japanese submarine activity, Harlow explained, hands moving efficiently across dials. Started picking up anomalous sounds 3 days after the attack. Thought it was equipment malfunction at first. He inserted a small paper roll into a machine. This is a sonographic reading from December 10th, standard hydrophone array, monitoring grid 7, right where the Arizona rests. The machine hummed to life, producing a scrolling visual representation of underwater sounds. Regular patterns emerged, peaks and valleys forming distinct groupings. This is the tapping, Harlow pointed. Irregular, but patterned. Not random. Here's where it gets strange. He advanced the paper. This is December 23rd. Same location, same time of night. The pattern had evolved. More complex, more deliberate. Almost like language. And this, Harlow said, inserting a final roll, is from yesterday. The pattern had changed dramatically. Interwoven with the original tapping was a second rhythm. Deeper, more resonant. The 2 patterns moved in counterpoint, like a conversation. 2 distinct acoustic signatures, Harlow whispered. The original one matches what we'd expect from metal-on-metal contact, consistent with survivors signaling. But this second signature, he tapped the darker markings. This has no mechanical explanation. Could it be other salvage equipment? Shifting debris? Not with this regularity. And there's this. Harlow pointed to a notation. When we triangulated the sound source, the original tapping came from exactly where we'd expect, compartment 23B. But the second source wasn't in the ship at all. It was beneath it. Cold crawled up Royce's spine. Beneath, as in the sea floor? Deeper. Harlow removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. Look, I'm a technician, not a poet, but I've been listening to ocean sounds for 8 years. Everything makes its own signature. Shrimp, whales, submarines. This doesn't match anything in our acoustic library. Harlow handed Royce a small manila envelope. Found these in the classified communications drop. Medical examiner's preliminary report on Maddox, and the photograph he took before he died. The black and white image showed a section of Arizona's flooded interior. At first, Royce saw nothing unusual, twisted metal, floating debris. Then he noticed what appeared to be scratch marks on the bulkhead, not random damage from the explosion, but deliberate patterns. The same patterns now appearing in Harlow's acoustic readings. There's one more thing. Harlow's voice had dropped to a whisper. Command ordered all hydrophone monitoring of Grid 7 terminated as of tomorrow. Official reason, reallocation of resources for Japanese submarine detection. But this came down from ONI directly, Office of Naval Intelligence. They're covering it up. They're scared, Chief, and Navy brass doesn't scare easy. January 7th, 1942. Dawn painted Pearl Harbor in sickly yellows as Royce made his decision. Sleep had become impossible. The tapping now followed him even in waking hours, a phantom rhythm behind his eyes. Harlow's acoustic readings and Maddox's photograph had only confirmed what he already knew. Something was happening in compartment 23B that defied rational explanation. Naval records indicated salvage operations would temporarily cease that day for equipment maintenance, a 12-hour window with minimal security around the wreck site. Royce moved with quiet efficiency, requisitioning dive gear using his boatswain's authority. The equipment log noted it for training purposes. "You understand this is a court-martial offense," Harlow said, helping Royce secure the oxygen tanks. The radio man had initially refused to participate, but relented when Royce showed him his latest notebook. Pages filled with transcribed tapping patterns that matched the ones appearing in Maddox's photograph. "If I'm right, court-martial will be the least of our concerns." Royce checked the dive watch, a black-faced Elgin military timepiece. "I need 30 minutes down there. If I'm not back in 40, alert Lieutenant Santiago at salvage operations." "Not Commander Thurston?" "Especially not Thurston." The water was surprisingly clear as Royce descended beside the Arizona's massive hull. Oil still leaked from the wreckage, rising in glistening obsidian beads around him. Each foot deeper brought more pressure, a physical reminder of the tons of water between him and the surface. The wreck was a grotesque monument, once proud naval architecture now transformed into twisted metal, shrouded in marine growth. Royce followed the salvage team's established path, marked by guidelines and navigation buoys. He reached the section above compartment 23B, where a jagged tear in the hull provided access to the interior. Warning markers had been placed prohibiting entry, stamped with Naval Intelligence authorization codes. The moment Royce slipped through the tear, the tapping began. Not distant now, but immediate, surrounding him on all sides. His flashlight beam cut through murky darkness, revealing a corridor transformed by disaster. Pipes hung like exposed arteries. Debris floated in suspended animation. The bulkheads bore the scratch marks from Maddox's photograph, but now Royce could see they formed complete patterns, circular arrangements of lines and dots reminiscent of ancient petroglyphs. The corridor terminated at a sealed pressure door marked 23B. Against all logic, the space beyond should have been completely flooded, utterly inaccessible. Yet as Royce approached, he noticed the impossible. A thin line of air between the water's surface and the compartment ceiling. An air pocket that could not exist at this depth. His dive training screamed against what he did next. Royce removed his mask and raised his head into the air pocket. The smell hit him first, not the expected staleness of trapped air, but something ancient and organic, like disturbed soil in a long-sealed tomb. Then came the sound, no longer muffled by water. The tapping rang with crystalline clarity, but it wasn't coming from inside compartment 23B. It emanated from beneath the metal deck plates. Royce's flashlight revealed what the Navy had tried to hide. The deck of compartment 23B had been modified during the Arizona's last retrofit. The standard steel had been replaced with a composite material, and embedded within it were objects that had no place on any Navy vessel. Stone tablets inscribed with the same circular patterns now scratched throughout the ship. One tablet had cracked during the sinking, exposing what lay beneath. Royce's light illuminated a small opening in the seafloor, a perfect circular shaft that disappeared into darkness. From this opening, came the answering taps, growing louder as Royce watched in horror. The logs of USS Arizona's final refit would later reveal that the modifications to compartment 23B had been ordered by a classified Naval Intelligence directive dated November 1941 under the heading Project Echo Containment Protocols. Royce barely remembered the ascent to the surface. His dive log would later show oxygen consumption patterns consistent with extreme physical exertion, though he had no memory of swimming frantically upward. Harlow pulled him onto the small maintenance skiff, alarmed by the vacancy in his eyes. "Jesus, Chief. I thought you weren't coming back." The radio man worked quickly to remove Royce's diving gear, checking for signs of decompression sickness. "What happened down there? What did you see?" Royce couldn't form words immediately. His hands trembled as they clutched a small waterproof bag containing something he'd taken from compartment 23B, a fragment of one of the stone tablets. When he finally spoke, his voice came as a rasp. They weren't trapped. They were awakened. Within hours of Royce's dive, Naval Intelligence personnel descended on Pearl Harbor. Royce found himself confined to quarters under the pretext of medical observation. The stone fragment disappeared from his footlocker. Harlow was abruptly transferred to a communications outpost in the Aleutian Islands. Alone and monitored, Royce made one final desperate attempt to document what he'd discovered. Using a portable voice recorder smuggled to him by a sympathetic corpsman, he created his testimony under the guise of a personal letter home. "This is Chief Boatswain's mate, Alan Royce, USS Arizona survivor, service number 03871, he began, voice steady despite his racing heart. "What I'm about to reveal contradicts official reports of the Pearl Harbor attack and subsequent recovery operations." He detailed his experiences chronologically: the initial tapping, his conversations with Whelan and Harlow, the acoustic readings, and finally, his dive to compartment 23B. The recorder whirred softly in the darkness of his quarters. "The Arizona wasn't just a battleship," Royce continued. "Based on what I found in compartment 23B, the vessel was modified to serve as a containment structure. The stone tablets embedded in the deck plates date back centuries. They're not just random artifacts. The symbols match prehistoric Hawaiian petroglyphs found in sacred caves on Oahu." He described the shaft he'd discovered beneath the broken tablet, a perfectly circular hole descending into darkness. The Navy knew something was down there. Project Echo wasn't about listening. It was about keeping something from speaking. A knock at the door interrupted his recording. Commander Thurston entered without waiting for a response, flanked by 2 armed Marines. His gaze fell immediately on the recorder. "That's an unauthorized communication device, Chief Royce." "Just recording a letter home, sir." Royce made no move to stop the tape. Thurston approached slowly. "We've spoken with the base psychologist. Your experiences represent a textbook case of traumatic hallucination, the mind creating patterns where none exist." "Is that what happened to Maddox too? And the divers who heard the tapping? All hallucinations?" "War creates casualties beyond the battlefield, Chief." Thurston's voice softened with practiced sympathy. "Sometimes the mind breaks before the body." "Then why seal off compartment 23B? Why classify the salvage operation?" Thurston signaled to the Marines, who moved to either side of Royce. "For your own well-being, you're being transferred to the Naval Convalescent Hospital in San Diego. Specialized treatment for combat stress." As they led him away, Royce continued speaking into the recorder. "The tapping wasn't survivors trying to get out. It was something else trying to communicate. Using them. The men who died when the Arizona sank became conduits. They're still down there, but they're not alone anymore. The recording continued for another 17 seconds, capturing only the sound of Royce's breathing and footsteps as he was escorted from the room. Then, in the empty quarters, a new sound emerged on the tape. Tap, tap, tap. 3 quick taps, 3 slow taps, 3 quick taps again, from somewhere much closer than the sunken Arizona. Naval Archives, Washington, D.C., March 17, 1986. Senior archivist Margaret Kellerman discovered the recording during a routine digitization of World War II oral histories. The small reel-to-reel tape had been filed incorrectly, mixed among psychological evaluation records rather than survivor testimonies. The faded label read simply, Royce A., Arizona Survivor Statement, January 1942. Kellerman's job involved transferring such recordings to modern formats before they degraded beyond recovery. She placed the tape on her machine, adjusted the playback settings to compensate for age, and pressed play. Chief Royce's voice emerged through decades of magnetic deterioration, his account of tapping sounds and hidden compartments striking her as the ramblings of a traumatized sailor. Until she heard the tapping itself, the rhythmic sounds were unmistakable even through the tape's static. Clear, deliberate patterns that couldn't be dismissed as random noise. More disturbing was their similarity to recordings recently obtained during the Arizona Memorial's underwater structural assessment. The acoustical analysis team had attributed those sounds to thermal metal expansion and tidal current interference. Kellerman knew better. She'd grown up in Hawaii, granddaughter of a Pearl Harbor survivor. The patterns matched ancient chants her grandmother had warned were never to be spoken aloud. Department of Naval History records showed that Chief Alan Royce had been honorably discharged in 1943 after treatment for combat-related stress disorder. He'd returned to his hometown in Oregon, where he lived until his death in 1971. His obituary mentioned that he never again went near large bodies of water. The file contained one other document, a 1948 letter from Commander James Thurston, by then retired, to the Office of Naval Intelligence. The containment at Site PH-23B remains intact, but monitoring must continue. The recent seismic activity has increased acoustic anomalies. If Royce's theory proves correct, the entities below perceive time differently. They're still communicating with those who died in 1941. Or perhaps, from their perspective, the men haven't died yet. Thurston's letter had been stamped unsubstantiated speculation and buried in the archives. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Annual inspection protocol maintained as requested." Kellerman's research revealed that every year since 1942, naval specialists conducted unexplained structural integrity assessments of the Arizona wreck, always on December 7th, always including acoustic monitoring of compartment 23B. The most recent survey had occurred 4 months ago. The final page in Royce's file was a classified memorandum dated 1985, summarizing historical anomalies associated with the Arizona. Divers report sensations of being watched from within the wreckage. Hydrophone operators describe hearing whispered voices between the tapping sequences. 3 maintenance divers have requested transfers after claiming to see figures moving inside sealed compartments. Memorial visitors report dreams of drowning men who whisper messages in unrecognizable languages. As Kellerman finished her review, she noticed a small envelope tucked into the file's inner pocket. Inside was a black and white photograph, the image Maddox had taken before his suicide. The symbols carved into the Arizona's bulkhead were now familiar to her. Identical patterns had begun appearing on other sunken warships throughout the Pacific. That evening, as she prepared to file her findings, Kellerman's phone rang. The caller asked for her by name, then identified himself as representing Naval Intelligence. "We understand you've been digitizing some restricted materials," the voice said. "Specifically, the Royce recording. How did you know?" "The recording is automatically flagged in our systems. Certain acoustic patterns trigger immediate notification." "The tapping," Kellerman whispered. "A team will collect those materials tomorrow morning," the voice continued. "In the meantime, you're instructed not to create additional copies." After hanging up, Kellerman sat in silence, contemplating the implications. Whatever lay beneath Pearl Harbor had been communicating for over 40 years, using the dead as its messengers, reaching through time as easily as through water. She thought of her grandfather, who'd survived that day, yet would wake screaming about men trapped underwater, begging for help. In his final years, he'd insisted they weren't asking to be rescued. They were trying to warn those above. The tapping had never been men trying to escape. It had been the Arizona's dead, desperately trying to keep something else from getting out. If these echoes from Pearl Harbor's depths still reverberate in your mind, take a moment to join the War Maestro's archive. Ensure your headphones aren't tapping, and subscribe to uncover more classified military horrors. Strike that notification bell. You'll want to be first to know when our next sealed file is breached. Remember, some sailors are still trying to send messages from below.